Brunswick, and welcome to today's minimum wage update with Labour Minister Trevor Holder. I'm Vicki Hogarth at the CHCO News Desk. We should be getting going very shortly. The journalists have all done the roll call at present. You might hear a little bit of the speakerphone journalists. Just a few are entering a little bit late, but we should be starting any moment now. We're expecting to hear about whether there's an increase in the minimum wage today. The Human Development Council actually just released a report that says that they call for a $15 minimum wage for New Brunswick, but that the actual livable wage, depending on which city you're in New Brunswick, the breakdown goes like this. This is according to the Human Development Council. It's $18.65 in Moncton, $19.75 in St. John, $21.20 in Fredericton, that is the highest, and $17.50 in Bathurst. Now, also due to the pandemic, there's been an increase in child poverty. About 1 in every 5 children in New Brunswick lives in poverty. So I think these will be a lot of the questions that the journalists bring to the table this morning when talking to the minister about whatever the announcement is. I'm sure that these facts and this data will factor in greatly into the questions. If you're following online right now, feel free to put your questions and concerns in the live chat on Facebook. I follow there as well while the conference is going, and depending on what news is shared this morning, I will pivot and ask a question accordingly. I'm somewhere in the middle, though, of the journalist roll call today, so the questions that you might ask might get asked before I get a chance to them, so please feel free to add any information or concerns or questions you have in that chat bubble, or as you can see, my email is below my name on the screen right now. That's just the general news team email. It goes to the 3 people on the news team at CHCO, news@chco.tv, or you can email me directly at Vicki, vicki.hogarth, HOGARTH @chco.tv if you have questions or concerns. You can also email me if you have COVID-19 questions or concerns. We will likely have a conference today or tomorrow on that. We're heading to the conference room right now, though, and I'll see you after.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll begin today's announcement with a few remarks from the minister before taking questions from the media. Just a reminder to everyone to make sure your microphones are on mute. Bonjour tout le monde. Je vous remercie d'être venu aujourd'hui. Nous commencerons l'annonce d'aujourd'hui par quelques remarques du ministre avant de répondre aux questions. Juste un rappel à tous les membres pour vous rassurer que vos microphones sont en sourdine. Allez-y, Monsieur le Ministre. Please go ahead, Minister.
Thanks, Tyler. Good morning. Bonjour, everyone. Thank you for joining me today virtually this morning for this announcement. As I stand here today, I am confident that we are doing a lot of things right economically here in New Brunswick. Despite the challenges that COVID-19 has brought over the past 2 years, it is clear that our province will emerge from this pandemic stronger than ever. In the last 9 months, our economy has shown substantial progress. Fastest growth in the nation in exports, double-digit increases in manufacturing sales, record-breaking real estate sales, and apartment and condominium construction is at its highest since 1972. Our population saw its highest gains from interprovincial migration in 45 years, adding more than 4,000 people from other provinces. Beyond that, more than 2,000 international newcomers have also joined us. These are just a few of the positive signs, and there is no doubt that together we've achieved one of the strongest recoveries in the country, and we continue to exceed expectations. However, despite all of those positives, there is one area where we have fallen behind: our minimum wage. Mais malgré tous les aspects positifs, il y a un secteur, un nouveau prix de retard, notre salaire minimum. In my riding of Portland Simons, it is as economically diverse as families are struggling to make ends meet. I have heard firsthand from my constituents how hard-working New Brunswickers sacrifice when they can't afford the basic necessities of life. I think we can all agree that families shouldn't have to choose whether they put food on the table or gas in the tank. Our government understands that we must take significant action to help those falling behind, and that brings me to the minimum wage. As I'm sure you all know, we are currently dead last in the country in terms of our minimum wage, and significantly behind our Atlantic Canadian neighbors. This fact is something that has been troubling me as Minister of Labour for some time. And to be frank, it's downright embarrassing. That's why today I am very proud to announce that in 2022, our government will increase New Brunswick's minimum wage by $2 per hour. C'est pourquoi aujourd'hui, je suis très fier de l'annoncer qu'en 2022, notre gouvernement augmentera le salaire minimum de Nouveau-Brunswick de $2 l'heure. This increase will happen in 2 increments, with the first adjustment of $1 per hour on April 1st and another $1 per hour on October the 1st. This will represent a 17% increase in the minimum wage, the most significant increase in 40 years. We will now be first in Atlantic Canada. We have been very clear as a government that we are committed to creating harmonization with other Atlantic Canadian jurisdictions in terms of the minimum wage to better position us to attract and retain workers. The combined increase in 2022 will give us a slight edge over Prince Edward Island by 5 cents. I want to be clear, the increases next year are a one-time course correction that are necessary to make us more competitive. It will not only impact the roughly 15,000 minimum wage earners, but 30,000 others who make less than $13.75 per hour. In 2023, future minimum wage increases will once again be tied to New Brunswick's Consumer Price Index, as it has been since our government introduced legislation in 2019. This will give employers predictability about raising wages going forward. We understand that this is not a small ask of our business community, but if you consider our track record since taking office, we have helped businesses and supported a pro-growth agenda. To name a few, we have addressed the excessive and unfair WorkSafe premiums, protect small business by not adopting a federal measure that would have resulted in provincial corporate income tax increase. During the pandemic, we gave much needed relief to businesses through loans and deferred interest payments, launched the tourism rebate to help the hospitality sector, and changed regulations to help licensed restaurants with the sale of alcohol through takeout and delivery orders. In terms of this increase, we have planned the first adjustment for April 1st to give our businesses time to prepare and adjust for the coming increase. Small businesses are still struggling, but on the whole, our economy has shown some resilience through the pandemic, and it remains strong. We are also aware of our own existing pressures in relation to adult care and child care employees, and we are committed to reviewing options as we move forward, just as any other employer will have to do. Our neighboring provinces are already operating at these higher levels to attract workers and keep their standard of living high. We too will adjust, and I am confident we will be better for it. In a province where we have some of the highest poverty levels in Canada, we have a moral imperative to do better, and this will surely help. This, at the end of the day, is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Merci. We'll now proceed with questions from the media. Nous allons maintenant procéder aux questions des journalistes. Each reporter will have one question and one follow-up. You are invited to ask the question in the official language of your choice. Chaque journaliste aura une question et un suivi, et vous êtes invité à poser vos questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Thank you. That said, we will start with Natalie Sturgeon from Global.
Thanks, Tyler. Minister, we know that Living Wage Canada says the livable wage in several of our major cities are between $17 and $20 an hour. I'm just wondering why only $2, given we know how expensive living has become.
Well, look, I want to reiterate, this is the largest percentage increase to the minimum wage since 1980. This is the biggest move that a government has made in more than a generation. And I think it's important to note that we have to do things slowly. We have to give businesses the time to be able to react and prepare. Obviously, we've been watching those reports, and I do think this is a very significant step forward. This now puts us on a par with the rest of Atlantic Canada. And from here, I plan in the very near future to start conversations, as I have in the past with my Atlantic Canadian counterparts, about harmonization and how we take steps forward coming out of this. And that will include discussions around a living wage as we move forward. But I don't think that we could have been part of that conversation had we not reacted the way that we have today, which is very significant. If we had done nothing at all, and if we had just simply let CPI do its thing in April, projections would have shown that we would have still been $1 behind Newfoundland, which was the third place jurisdiction. There's no way that we could have had a real decent conversation about how we move forward with a decent wage for our citizens here in New Brunswick that are affected the most by this. So I think this is a huge step forward. It's not going to be easy for some of our businesses, and we realize that, and we're committed to working with them on that. But make no mistake about it, if we didn't do this, there would be New Brunswickers that were being left behind. And that's what's driving myself as Minister of Labour. That's what is driving our government on this. We can no longer leave people behind, and this is the most significant step forward in more than a generation in that regard.
Thank you, Minister. Natalie, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, just a point of clarification, if I may. So if a business at this point pays more than minimum wage, would they then have to boost that by $2 as well? Is that going to be part of this announcement?
If they're paying less than the $13.75 that we will go to in October, then yes, they will have to start paying minimum wage for those employees.
Sampson, CTV.
Good morning. Was there any consultation with small businesses on how this will affect them?
Look, there's been a number of consultations over the last number of years, and I realize that this is not easy, and I realize there's going to be some pushback. I did speak with a number of the advocacy groups over the last week, and I acknowledge that this isn't going to be easy, but the premiers in Atlantic Canada were clear a few years ago that we were going to be moving towards a conversation around harmonization. Everyone knew that. We can't be last in the we cannot be last in Atlantic Canada. And I'll put it to you this way: a hamburger costs pretty much the same in Sackville as it does in Amherst, and it costs about the same to produce that. And my question is, why would anybody think that it's appropriate that the person serving that hamburger in Sackville is compensated $2 less than the person over in Amherst? It's just unacceptable, and it's time that we moved on and made sure that we weren't leaving New Brunswickers behind.
Allison, do you have a follow-up?
Yes. Will there be any assistance for businesses who are already struggling, seeing this rise in cost for them?
Look, there's going to be a significant conversation between our department, ONB, Service New Brunswick, Finance, about what we can do moving forward. But the first thing that I would tell any business from the perspective of the Department of Post-Secondary Education, Training and Labor, come and visit one of our working New Brunswick offices. We have a tremendous amount of flexibility to help people with their individual needs that we didn't have before we launched the working New Brunswick model. So the help is there. I'll give you one example. A year ago, restaurant owners came to me with the issue of the training that had to happen for COVID protocols. And we put a training program in place, and we did that through dollars in our department. So we can do a number of things thinking outside the box. What might work in, as I've said many times before, what works in Moncton might not be what works in St. John and vice versa, and what works in Moncton today might not be what works there 2 years from now. So we have the flexibility to work with the business community, work with business owners to tailor solutions around their individual needs. But that's just from the perspective of our department. There will be other conversations throughout government and with the other economic development agencies to address that going forward. The business community has my commitment and has the commitment of this government that we are going to work with them. But at the end of the day, there is nobody in this province that should be proud of the fact that we were dead last out of 13 Canadian jurisdictions, and in Atlantic Canada, we were in last place by a country mile. That was just not acceptable.
Thank you. Brittany Gillifort, All New Brunswick. Brittany, do you have a question for the minister? Frédéric Camarano, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur le ministre. Alors, j'aimerais savoir pourquoi on a attendu aussi longtemps pour corriger la situation. Je vous rappelle que votre gouvernement a augmenté le salaire minimum de 5 cents cette année.
Look, we took the decision about 2-3 years ago to index minimum wage with CPI. That was done to create predictability. But I'm going to tell you that in the 3 years that we've been in office, this 17% increase combined with the increase over the last 2 or 3 years is very significant. It will be over 20% when you add all of the increases up together. And I don't think that we've waited. I think we're taking some bold action right now, and we're sending a message to New Brunswickers that we're not leaving them behind. And I certainly don't believe that the most significant increase since 1980, since a generation, since the Hatfield government, this is the most significant increase since then. And I think we can be proud as a government that in 3 years, we acted accordingly to make sure that New Brunswickers workers that didn't have anybody advocating for them, quite frankly. I mean, they don't have a union. They've got the Minister of Labour. And at the end of the day, I'm quite proud of the fact that over the course of 3 years, we have raised the minimum wage significantly in this province.
Frédéric, est-ce que vous avez un suivi?
Oui, tout à fait. J'aimerais savoir si M. le ministre pense que 13,75 $, ce qui va être le salaire minimum à partir du 1er octobre prochain, c'est suffisant pour une personne au Nouveau-Brunswick pour ne pas avoir à choisir justement entre la nourriture et l'essence.
Well, what I certainly know based on the conversations that I had with my own constituents, that leaving at $11.75 was certainly not appropriate. And I think this is a very significant step forward. We will continue to index it with inflation beyond that, and we will have a conversation with our Atlantic Canadian counterparts about harmonization and what next steps collectively as a region that we can take to get people to a more livable wage in this province. And I think this is significant. I think the economists will tell us that this is very significant. Probably hasn't been done in any other jurisdiction in a long time. So I do feel confident that we're taking a step forward. Is it the last step we'll ever take to make sure that the spending power of low wage earners is enhanced? No, there will be other things as a government that we will study over time, but this is a significant step forward.
Thank you, Minister. Vicky Hogarth, CHCO-TV.
Thank you, Tyler. Minister Holder, how are you going to work with businesses, both big and small, to ensure they don't cut down on employee hours just to even out this wage increase for themselves?
Well, we will work with them, but I think it's important to point out that I know there's a lot of economists that have changed their tune over the last a couple of decades with respect to the theory that just because you raise minimum wage that there are layoffs that happen as a result. There was actually a great study done a few years ago comparing the minimum wage in the state of New Jersey to the state of Pennsylvania, and they compared communities along the border. And actually, the gentleman that did that just recently won a Nobel Peace Prize for some of his work in that regard. And the results were that in New Jersey, we did not see a decrease in employment. We actually saw an increase, and the fact of the matter is, you know what? New Jersey became competitive. This is about our competitiveness. I have talked to a number of folks over the last number of weeks. Some restaurant owners have told me that they are now seeing people working in the sector in Halifax that they used to see in restaurants in St. John. That tells me that we're just not competitive. And I can tell you that a number of small business owners have consistently told me they are struggling to find enough employees to do the work that they need to do. And the fact of the matter is, we need to take steps to make sure that they're compensated so that we create a dedicated, loyal workforce here in New Brunswick.
Do you have a follow-up?
I do, Tyler. Thank you. Interprovincial migration you mentioned as a huge positive, and it is in many respects, but it's also driven up the cost of living, and the pandemic has contributed to poverty levels as well. And I know the $2 is very positive, but is it enough to adequately address the cost of living in New Brunswick right now?
It's one very significant step forward. Is it the only thing that we're ever going to do as a government in this regard? No. But I think the fact that it's the most significant in a generation is sending a message to New Brunswickers that we care about them, that we don't want to see low-wage earners left behind, that we want to do everything that we can to enhance their living and their standard of living. But make no mistake about it, we know this is just one step forward of many that are going to be needed as we go through this period. But what drove me on this was that I was hearing from constituents that we're seeing rising housing costs. And not only that, the price of everything going up. We are going into an inflationary period by all accounts here. And something had to be done. This is the first step. This is about making sure that New Brunswickers are not left behind, and we will continue to fight for New Brunswickers as we move forward. They have my commitment as Minister of Labour, and I do believe that this is the most progressive step forward with respect to helping low-wage earners in more than a generation.
Thank you, Minister. Shane McGee, CBC.
Minister, you just referred to housing prices, and advocacy groups had been calling for a larger minimum wage increase, in part because housing costs, rental costs are less affordable on the current minimum wage. Is the government looking to do anything about rent control to ensure that those rising housing costs are make this wage increase something that does have an impact?
Well, look, I don't want to speak for my other ministerial counterparts. We know that's an issue. It's a significant issue, and we're continuing. We've taken a few steps over the last little while, but we're going to continue to monitor that. I also believe that we need to continue to work to have more affordable housing built in the province as we move forward here. And I just go back to my point that this is not the last step in terms of making sure that low-wage earning New Brunswickers are protected. But I think the numbers speak for themselves. It's the most significant one in more than a generation. But we're not done yet. What that looks like, we'll continue to work with my other ministerial counterparts as we move forward here.
Shane, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, Minister, can you elaborate on what options are being considered when you talk about next steps?
Well, I think one of the first things, I've talked a lot about harmonization with the rest of Atlantic Canada. I think we need to look at what's done in other jurisdictions around taxation, around basic exemptions and whatnot. But beyond that, I think we need to look at what are other jurisdictions doing and what are some of the best practices elsewhere so that we create a harmonized approach to this so that we're not all competing against one another here in Atlantic Canada. So I think that's one of the first steps that we can take moving forward.
Thank you. Judy Desailles, CJPN.
Oui, ma question, ce serait, vous avez parlé tout à l'heure des autres provinces canadiennes, qu'on était en bas de la liste. Après l'augmentation, est-ce que ça va nous placer, ça va nous augmenter un peu? Où est-ce que ça va nous placer dans la liste?
After this increase, we will be first in Atlantic Canada. We'll be 5 cents out of Prince Edward Island.
Parfait. Et ma deuxième, ce serait pourquoi avez-vous pris la décision de faire l'augmentation par incrément?
Well, with respect to the 2 steps, I think that we have to be reasonable to the business community. They have to prepare budgets, and we're giving them 4 or 5 months notice in terms of April 1st, and then we're giving them some time beyond that into October. So that's why those increments were established. And in terms of why we came to $2, I mean, that was simply because if we're going to have a serious conversation about harmonization in Atlantic Canada, we had to be in the game, and we weren't. We were, even, as I said a minute ago, even with, even if we had done nothing and just let CPI do its thing in April, we still would have been $1 behind Newfoundland, which would have been the 3rd place jurisdiction.
Merci, Judy. Final questions from David Koch, BNI. David, are you there? Go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Minister Holder, do you believe that this will improve your government's performance in the polls?
I'm going to be very clear on this. I feel very passionately about this as Minister of Labour. I represent a constituency that is incredibly economically diverse, and I see these challenges firsthand. This work that we're launching here today has been in the works for a long time. I'm proud of it. It has absolutely nothing to do with politics and everything to do with making sure that we don't leave New Brunswickers behind.
Thank you. And final question, David, go ahead.
In terms of the fears about the future of small businesses, some economists say increases in minimum wage actually stimulate consumption, benefiting small businesses in the long run, since poor and working class people have a higher propensity to spend. Do you find that persuasive?
I certainly believe that if we increase the spending power of the citizens that are going to be impacted here, that is going to generate economic activity, absolutely. And I think most economists around the world have started to understand that keeping a competitive minimum wage actually helps the economy. It does not lose jobs like people have thought that it has. I've talked to a number of economists over the last week or so as we led up to this moment. And I am confident that New Brunswick is going to be much stronger as a result of this, and continue to move forward with the other conversations that we have throughout Atlantic Canada and with other government departments.
Thank you, Minister. Merci tout le monde. And that concludes our news conference for today. Ça c'est conclu notre conférence de presse pour aujourd'hui.
That concludes this morning's minimum wage update for New Brunswick with Minister of Labour Trevor Holder. So good news for a lot of people in New Brunswick, a $2 increase to minimum wage. Now, Minister Holder mentioned that this will be first starting $1 in April 2022, so this is all for next year. $1 by April 2022, and then the other $1 by October, so the full increase in less than a year's time. I haven't heard yet if there is a COVID-19 update later today, but I will post that on Facebook as soon as I'm notified. I imagine there'll be one today or tomorrow. So I do have a lot of questions submitted from viewers at home regarding the pandemic. So please follow on Facebook. It's CHCO-TV if you want to see when the next update will be. I always post it as soon as I am aware. I'm Vicki Hogarth at the CHCO News Desk. I will see you next time.
a news and public affairs production of CHCO-TV, New Brunswick's only source for independent community television.